Welcome to The Global Signal, a podcast exploring how emerging technologies, international policy, and financial markets are reshaping global power. I'm Joshua.
I'm Benjamin Fields. Each episode, we move beyond the headlines to examine the strategic dynamics that will matter not just this year, but decades from now.
How innovation drives competition, how capital flows influence geopolitics, and where cooperation remains possible in a rapidly changing world. Let's get started.
We're joined today by Darnley Howard, President and Principal Consultant of Advansa International and Partner at Pan Diaspora Capital Management. With over 4 decades of experience in corporate finance and strategy consulting, Darnley has been a trusted advisor to early-stage businesses, governments, and investors across North America, Latin America, and Africa. He holds an MBA from the University of Chicago's Booth School of Business and a Bachelor of Finance from the Wharton School of the University of Pennsylvania. Darnley's experience in emerging markets and financial data has been instrumental in driving impactful, sustainable growth. Welcome to the podcast, and we're excited to hear what you can share with our audience today.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Darnley, it's a pleasure as always. I think one of the most significant topics as it relates to some of the work where all of our work overlaps is with respect to what's going on in Africa right now. 2 key projects are the Liberty Corridor and then the Lobito Corridor project. And so we're going to talk about the bankability of projects, as we understand this is a space that you've spent some time on in your career. And so from your vantage point, Darnley, what are the key factors that determine the bankability of infrastructure projects within the Lobito Corridor and the Liberty Corridor? And how do you approach de-risking these investments?
I would say that for bankability, the key factor is cash flow. That's number one, because that's where the investors get their return. That's how business sustains itself, and without that, you're really in trouble. So I would start with cash flow, and that can come in a number of forms depending on the project. For example, for energy and electric power, it's the power purchase agreement. For some projects, it's a specific off-taker agreement. For example, one project that I'm working on now is to help African companies to set up manufacturing for renewable fuel, for which my partner has a contract to supply to large fuel distributors in England. So in that case, there is a clear off-taker who's prepared to sign an off-take agreement for long-term for a long-term business. So that's the goal, is that long-term commitment, because that's what investors like to see, and that's what they tend to evaluate. If it were a housing deal, then you would look for a steady market of buyers. Often in housing projects, they're instigated by government who are looking to provide housing, say for civil servants or for teachers or for police, and they'll often help to subsidize them. So that's another form of identifiable cash flow. The other item, I would say, the other factor that's important is the strength of the management team. And that will be evidenced by either prior industry experience, proven management success generally, strong relationships in the industry and in the specific geography that you're working in, and of course, integrity in all things. So those are, I think, the 2 things: cash flow and the strength of the management team.
That's really interesting. Those are a couple of things that we believe that businesses focus on a lot. There's a couple of risks or things or nuances that I want to ask about to either accentuate some problems with those particular risks, or maybe there's different risks. If we think about the way that businesses work in Africa, for example, the Liberty Corridor is unique in that they're building everything brand new, and they're working with Liberia and Guinea, which have different relations than we have with the Lobito Corridor, which is, a much bigger project, but there's already existing infrastructure and already things that are undergoing there. And so when you take something that's much more ambitious, but there's already foundational things happening and there's already activities undergoing, is there a differential risk compared to when you're going to a new region like the Liberty Corridor and you're trying to build it brand new? And then we know that there's involvement from a lot of different funding partners, whether that's from the EU, the US, China. And so can you give us some nuance on what the differences would look like based on new versus existing, rehabilitation versus, and then the different types of funding partners and any other nuances you can think that might come up?
Well, with something that's already existing, of course, it means that there's, in addition to not having to build everything, it also means that there's an industry there. There's an ecosystem. There's more likely to be a talent base and better human capital. There's more likely to be ancillary businesses that support it, and also a path to supporting additional businesses that will support it. On the other hand, in an existing business, if there are difficulties, those difficulties might be more entrenched. They might be more entrenched. There might be political factors that are difficult to wrestle with. Whereas with something brand new, it means that the founders and the investors are free to define things as they see fit. You can kind of set the stage for things and take greater initiative and have more of a first mover advantage. So I think just in that specific area, I think those are the key factors. But in general, as you think about risk and you think about de-risking, I think a lot of it has to do with the upfront planning and research that you do, the ability to understand the markets before actually making a commitment. You want to seek guidance from trusted advisors, people who know the region, who know the industry. I would also say to take advantage of the diaspora, of which we are all a part. And because there are people who have an understanding of the culture and the geography and the business conditions, and can be a real help to companies, especially to American companies who may have little familiarity with Africa, beyond what's in the media. And I think the other big de-risking tactic is to have boots on the ground. Is that to be there and to see things for yourself, to talk to the government officials, talk to business partners, talk to cab drivers, just get a better feel for what you're stepping into.
Absolutely. The nuances in these different countries in Africa substantiate that local intelligence as well as that cultural sensitivity in doing business, recognizing that the decision-making hierarchy may be quite different from what we see in the Western world or in other countries, a part of the global South. So definitely appreciate your perspective on that.
Yeah, definitely. There's often different business ethics, different business etiquette to be mindful of. And the more you meet people and spend time with people, the better feel you get for those nuances.
I'll ask you the next formal question, then I'll try to wrap it into the responses you've said before. I really like what you said about boots on the ground. I happened to sit through a seminar with Matthew Devlin of Uber, and he talked a little bit about their strategy in terms of how do they infiltrate a new country, specifically countries in Africa, on this presentation, and how do they make relationships on the ground in such a manner that they're able to make the place investable originally. And one of the unique things about the US that we do differently from other countries is that we actually don't allow ourselves to engage in corrupt practices or things like that
Right.
in terms of formal law. And so if we try to have a Western perspective here, what unique opportunities and challenges exist for Western investors, specifically within the libido and liberty corridors, and how are these related to capital deployment?
I would say that it's better for us to be known as honest and straightforward. And once you deviate from that, it changes everything, because once people know that you're for sale, and then you can't do anything without paying the additional toll.
Absolutely. There are a lot of developments going on in the United States presently that could materially impact capital flows to different countries in Africa. I think, we are keen to see more capital flow to certain countries, such as the Democratic Republic of Congo, or even the likes of, let's say, Kenya. Or in the last, let's say, 6 months, 9 months, they've gone through some macroeconomic challenges, but it seems like there's definitely potential for them to stabilize over time. Now, the next question we're going to ask is with respect to capital raising strategies. Can you elaborate on the approaches and best practices for raising private capital for projects in these corridors, especially in the context of emerging markets? You've done work in Africa, you've done work in Latin America, and we're hopeful that this answer leads to a lot of people giving you calls as potential clients. Darnley.
Well, yeah, we over the course of the last few years, we've developed a network of investors who have a focus on specific industries and who have a focus, say, on Africa, who we can call on to at least take a look at deals, and if it fits their strategy at the time, then it's possible that something can go forward. There's a couple who have actually given us a mandate to go find deals for them. So that's how we know that there's capital out there that's looking to be deployed. I would say that generally one can look at either financial investors, PE companies, venture capitalists, and investment banks, people of that nature, and then there are also investors who are more strategic investors, meaning generally, say, companies in the industry. The company that's going to sell the railroad cars, for example, might be also a source of financing in one way or the other. And the terms would be different in that case because they're trying to meet a specific operational goal, so that they might not, so some of the strict financial ratios and things might not be as critical to them as they might be to someone who looks at it in more of a bankerly sort of fashion. So I would say that. I would say that we're seeing some trends, for example, more of a trend toward private debt, which I would be kind of careful about, for at least for early stage companies and for early businesses, where debt is difficult. It's difficult when, again, going back to cash flow, your cash flow and everything is highly uncertain in that case. So you don't want to be bound to making a payment every quarter. So that would tend to lean one toward equity investment. I think that one reason founders sometimes tend to want to gravitate toward debt is that they're sensitive about giving up equity or giving up ownership. And I would say that many entrepreneurs I think, stress that aspect a little bit too much, and should be a little bit flexible. It's better to have a small percentage of something huge than to have a lot of nothing. So that would be just one caveat that I would want to point out. I think those are the main things. Just don't get too hung up on equity amounts, and to generally be open to a lot of different capital structures, because people are doing a lot of different things to make deals happen. Sometimes sometimes there are questions about interest rates, but interest rates kind of are what they are. But at the same time, there are some There are some firms who will say provide a more favorable interest rate in exchange for a bigger payment on the back end, or there might be convertible deals of one sort or another. So there are a lot of different ways to structure things to make everyone happy.
One of the biggest challenges, particularly for a founder, or I think one of the largest perceptions that has a negative impact on their business is the fact that, they believe they have this unicorn, concept, and not to say, there will be a very small minority which actually builds some, substantive traction, but they're so fixated on the idea of maintaining equity in their business. But to your point, okay, you can own a lot of the shares in your company, but what about scalability? Sometimes you need, growth equity financing, or even, VC financing to even get yourself in a position where you can serve the market that you're focused on, as well as the customer needs effectively. And especially with artificial intelligence, just broadly advanced technology, some of these business expenses, whether it be capital expenditure or operational expenditure, is actually increasing. And so I think that point that you've made, Darnley, is quite important for the founders watching this episode or listening in to be mindful of it. You ensure that the investor will generally be engaged or give you resources, whether it be access to their network or guidance, and that they've done some work in the area of business that you are in. But really, it's sometimes it's kind of looking at it like accepting help is the point I'm getting at. Is very important.
I would definitely agree, and you make a good point about some of the other benefits that a good investor can provide in terms of access to a network, access to talent, which makes a big difference for a lot of companies. I think generally it helps to have a plan in terms of not only your basic growth plan, but you should also incorporate financing into your growth plan, so that you're thinking about what stage that you're at. If you're at a very early stage and you're thinking of it as a seed stage, then that's going to dictate a certain type of investment. As you grow, there might be a different type of external investment, or if you're sufficiently profitable, there may be less need for external capital. That depends. Depends on the business. If you're looking to scale, of course, and that does mean more external capital, most likely. And just generally, you'll be thinking as you grow and as your company matures, the level of certainty increases, and that's when you become more attractive to sort of more conventional debt financing, working capital financing. You'll also want to think about your suppliers as sources of financing through, for example, more favorable payment terms, which can really help the working capital situation.
You've worked across different geographies. Is it actually really that more expensive to invest in Africa? So do we need as much capital? Is it really as risky as people say? Or are there differential mechanisms that you can use in order to ensure that the capital that you deployed is being used properly? For example, can you push revenue in companies a little bit earlier in Africa? Do you need a smaller amount of revenue? Are there more guarantees? Can you use tranche funding or other mechanisms to make sure that things go along smoothly?
Well, yeah, there are some different tools you can use, like guarantees are sometimes available. This one lender that we know is very big on standby letters of credit, so that if you have access to one, then that can help to get financing. If you have strong receivables, that meaning receivables from a well-established customer, particularly if it's an export customer, if you're exporting into the developed world, say into Europe or North America, those receivables can help with the financing and help to help you to be a little bit more bankable. I think that, again, generally, the more knowledge you have about the market and about the culture, that will also help in terms of managing the risk. In terms of whether it is more or less risky than other places, I think that I wouldn't want to make broad generalizations. Anytime you, of course, you invest further away from home, then it's more risky. Okay, what I know about investing here in DC, it would be different if I were investing in Montana. I don't know too much about Montana, so it would be, it's within the United States, but there would still be a lot to learn. So from that, and that's why, for example, most VCs don't really stray that far from home. For those that do, I would say my advice, and one thing that we're leaning into, is business incubators, the incubators and accelerators, of which there are some in Africa. And those can help with the vetting process. Someone that's been through those programs is more likely to be serious and credible. I would say also African-based investors. There are some African VC firms that we know of that if I were a U.S. investor, I would say I would encourage one to get comfortable with some of those VCs, and then let them do the diligence on all the different places that, of course, just logistically it's impossible to get to all these different places, but a lot of these VCs have strong networks all over Africa, or at least all over their part of Africa, that can really help in terms of evaluating risk and understanding risk. And by talking to people and by getting building that network, you really get to understand what the realities are versus what the reputation is, and you can make better decisions that way. There are a lot of, especially now when there are a lot of the African countries are facing things like travel bans and the State Department notices and all that stuff. Which if I were someone in Missouri or somewhere, and I'm looking to sell farm equipment and I see that, well, I can understand people being apprehensive. But if you know people in those countries, or if you have some understanding of what things are really like there, then you can make a better decision, and maybe you can find something that other people are not, and you can take advantage of those relationships in order to strike profitable deals.
That lines up a lot with the way that I'm doing my dissertation research. And even if I use the example here in the States, like I grew up in Tulsa, Oklahoma, there's a lot of like California investors who sell their houses and come and invest here, and they don't know the city whatsoever or the way that it's moving. And so they make some pretty dumb investment decisions. So I agree with what you're saying. Moving on to the next question, specifically, I think, because a lot of our watchers are going to be really interested in the libido and the Liberty Corridor. So I'll try to shift our conversation a little bit to those. But what role do you think public-private partnerships play in the development of those two corridors? And how do you see them evolving in the future?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. In fact, one of my partners, the one who I was doing the fuel project with, and he and I had a conversation about that a while back. And I don't know that they're necessarily the magic bullet, but I do think that they can, if they're done well, to help with kind of alignment of interest, in that you at least know that the government is working with you, if they are also part of the business in some way. So I think they can be helpful from that standpoint. At the same time, sometimes governments will want more than the value they provide justifies, and that's, I think, the sort of the tug of war that we're faced with.
Definitely helps from a reassurance standpoint to have the government involved, and depending on the type of contractual structures in place, this can really be appealing to private investors. I hold the belief that to really actualize the potential of these projects, you have to look at sources of capital where the decision-making process is a bit more streamlined, that being family offices as well as sovereign wealth funds and private equity shops. As a follow-up, how do you view these sorts of investors where there exists a flatter decision-making process compared to those such as pension funds or broader asset management companies, and incentivizing them to go forward with these sorts of large scale investment, whether it be co-investments or perhaps they have the sheer capital to go forward with closing out on some of these larger, more capital intensive deals.
I think that in those cases, we're looking at a couple of factors. One, with some family offices, the knowledge base might be a lot less than it would be, say, for a more institutional investor than it would be for, I don't know, a BlackRock or Barclays or someone like that, where they have where they'll have more dedicated expertise, and therefore those offices should rely more on advisors, as I mentioned before. And it would be helpful, to position oneself as a trusted advisor and to develop a strong relationship with them, so that you can provide them the guidance that they need and the guidance that will help them to move forward.
A lot of people, they know who some of these investors are, but they have trouble forming these actual relationships with them. How can people actually form successful relationships with these investors? It's a matter of value proposition, and it's a matter from my vantage point. But from your vantage point, you've had decades and decades of cultivating these relationships.
Well, yeah, I think it's a matter of just maintaining contact in some form, either through things like what you're doing with this podcast, or newsletters or communications of that sort. Even social media can be helpful. It can be helpful in that way. Some of the initial contacts are often made through alumni or through the universities and through conferences of one sort or another. I think that those are often the most helpful. Also, trade associations are very helpful and very useful. One thing that I've started to do, which I hadn't done too much of, but I should probably do more of, is make more use of the embassies. Particularly since I'm here in DC, I'm trying to cultivate better relationships with some of the embassies, and I'm just sort of taking some baby steps in that direction. And I think having those connections and being able to connect U.S. businesses through those channels is also helpful. And in addition to U.S. government channels and U.S. diplomatic channels as well, the U.S. commercial service has often been helpful. Things like Exim Bank and organizations of those sorts.
Definitely, the relationship building does not end with just those in the private sector. I think the takeaway for our audience listening in, or just who are watching via YouTube and the like, it's the fact that you need to utilize the resources you have at your disposal, whether it be trade associations or whether it be the different embassies or government resources. If you're in France, or if you're in the United States, or if you're in Japan, there generally should be some government resources that could be beneficial for you to build meaningful relationships to better understand these markets, and to build stronger relationships with those on the ground.
Yeah, and different, a lot of the advisors are doing different events. There are trade missions that happen to different places, which are also very helpful. One thing that I'm going to be part of, looking to do it fairly soon, is to, again, leaning into the incubator theory, is to actually be able to have a forum that gathers incubators and investors who are always seeking each other out. because the incubators are always looking for investors for the company, for the startups that they're working with. And of course, investors are looking at incubators as a source of viable deals. So we wanted to get them in a room. In fact, we're looking to do that maybe in April, to get them all in a room and have them to share some ideas.
That's a fantastic idea. And so, Darnley, speaking about these large infrastructure projects, the Lobito Corridor and the Liberty Corridor, how do they contribute to the broader economic development of their regions, and what implications does this have for investors?
Well, for their regions, they make a big difference in terms of not only the specific industries. I mean, I think those projects specifically have been put together, I think, with minerals and mining in mind specifically, which is good, and that's important. Those are important industries in those countries. But those, I think, they can lead to, first of all, additional infrastructure development in those countries, which is needed badly for all kinds of business, and not only for access to ports and to ocean travel, but also within Africa, because there's very little so far. There's very little commerce from one African country to another, and I know that there are a lot of people who want to change that and who want to improve that situation. And that's, of course, what the whole continental free trade area is about, and those kinds of initiatives. And you need infrastructure in order to make those happen. You need to be able to move goods, to move information, to move capital, to move people. All those need to be accessible and not thwarted by simply the existence of a national border. Having said that, it won't be easy. I'm always wondering, for example, if you're building a railroad, building a railroad in East Africa, are you going across? How is that going to affect the habitat of some great migration of wildebeest or something, or there's some other significant environmental impact that you have to think about? If there are communities that are going to change one way or another. Some communities will grow because of it. Some communities will be overrun because of it, and there's a lot. So there's a lot to think about, both from the local standpoint and from an investor standpoint. I mean, those are some of the things that investors need to think about early on before you start making commitments. And those are the things you want to understand as you take those initial trips or have those initial conversations with people on the ground.
And as a really quick follow-up, what do you think makes it easiest in order to make relationships with people on the ground? And how would that look differently? For example, if you just wanted a few local people that can kind of teach you about the context, you wanted to make relationships with other business owners that could be like suppliers, for example, or local bureaucrats or lawyers. And then how would you go about also building relationships with people that are in government, particularly people who are in high positions in government, especially within the African context?
Well, in government, I would say probably through the embassies and through sometimes in some of the conferences, like the university conferences. Sometimes, depending on the topic, some government people will appear there. More generally, I would say, first of all, use the diaspora. I mean, that's one thing, especially in the United States. That's something that we have that a lot of people don't. Is that we have there's somebody from everywhere, and particularly in the case of Africa, since you have to cross the ocean to get here, you have to have some resources generally. So you're usually going to be interacting with someone with some capacity and with some network. So someone that you met in a university environment, former classmate, student, or teacher, or something along those lines. Those are people who are often people who have the ability to get things done. For me, it was very much through the diaspora. At some point, there was a point where I just sort of looked up and found out I just know a whole lot of Ghanaians. How do I meet so many Ghanaians? So, and some of that started to bear fruit. I was able to meet a couple of people who introduced me to some of their old schoolmates back home, and that's how some partnerships form.
I hear you. I hear you. You spend time to cultivate relationships, and I think it's throughout the years that you begin to see, okay, one, you never know where someone is going to end up, if they're going to end up, MD at some sort of bank or VP somewhere, or work at some institution or work for the government. And I think this is where some of these relationships, in terms of helping you to understand the lay of the land, could be quite beneficial. So as our last question, Ben will take the baton.
And so we talked a lot about things that are related to the investors or related to the work that we do, but one important aspect that exists here is the actual community. And so if we were to use the vantage point of the Libido and the Liberty corridors, how would investments like this or in other types of business affect the broader economic development of the regions? And what implications would this have for the people on the ground and then also for the investors? And if things go good for people on the ground, then how would that help the investors in the long run?
Well, I think for the investor should make it a point of making sure that the investments that they're making and that their interaction in those markets provides a real benefit for the local communities. And there are a couple of ways that can happen. One is through transfer of know-how and technology, through training and through training, for example. There's of course job creation. There's job creation, but there are jobs and there are jobs. So making sure that there are good jobs, that they're safe jobs, that they actually improve people's lives, that they allow people to educate their children. To really make sure that those things happen, to understand the environmental impact, positive or negative, that you're going to be having, to keep all those factors in mind. It's funny, even if your investment does not have the label of impact investment, it can have impact, and I think that's worth taking note of. That's one thing that I've looked to do and that I've made some study of is to be able to measure impact along various metrics, whether it's environmental, whether it's about human development, whether it's about economic development. To what extent does your investment support the development of other smaller businesses in that community?
Darnley, it's been a pleasure to have you on this episode of The Global Signal. Is there any other last minute thought you would like to leave for our audience watching or listening in today?
Well, I would only encourage people to think in terms of long-term strategy. Think about what's going to happen in 5 years, 10 years, 20 years. And I would think about understanding, really getting close to the markets so you can understand the risk and really make a sensible evaluation of risk.
Okay, folks, you have heard it from Mr. Darnley Howard himself on how you could potentially actualize some of your investments in African markets, as well as how you can think through and build meaningful relationships. Darnley, thank you again.
Thanks very much. Thank you for having me. It's been a great conversation.
Thank you. It was great to have you.